My column in the Australian this weekend explores the future of Australian education, of Australian higher education, with the help of three charts. The first chart is actually one of my favorite charts. It shows the share of population that is aged 25 to 34, early career professionals that did hold a bachelor's degree or higher by gender. And we do see here on this chart that in the early 1980s, we had 8% of women who had a bachelor's degree. A bachelor degree was very, very special. It was pretty much the entry ticket to a rather prosperous career. You did stand out with a bachelor's degree. This rose quite dramatically over the last decades. By now, almost 50%, 46% of women in this age bracket do hold a bachelor's degree. Bachelor education, bachelor level education is the new normal. It becomes increasingly essential that you do hold a bachelor's degree. That is, of course, the standard case that I want to make in favor of higher education. We rely, because we move into a knowledge economy, we rely on a highly educated workforce. So education isn't going anywhere. But what does that mean when we look a bit deeper into the data? We do see that over the last decades, really, more and more international students came to Australia. That means, of course, in Australia, international students pay really high fees in order to get a degree, and they essentially quite significantly subsidize local students. We saw those numbers from international students, and you can cut and slice them and define them in different ways. So the exact number of international students in this chart doesn't matter so much as is the shape. We started the century with close to 300,000 international students. And then by 2008, this is when I came to Australia as an international student, we had over 500,000 international students, quite dramatically. We peaked temporarily in 2009, just before the GFC really hit. We peaked at just over 600,000 students. GFC hit. And we then took a dive for 3 years of international student enrollments in Australia before we recover. And this shape is quite important for us to note now, because we recovered to close to 1 million international students in Australia. And we do know that due to COVID, due to the lockdown, due to limited travel internationally, those international student numbers will collapse in the next year. But the question is, how long will the recovery last? Or how long will it take until we are recovered? We don't know. We have absolutely no idea. We don't know how long COVID will go on for. But if we have 1 year of drops, however strong this is, that means that this 1 year drop carries forward for another 3 years, 3 to 4 years, because that's the length of a university degree. And then as the enrollments ramp up again, you can recover. But so we do, at the very least, need to say that if we see a drop of international student enrollments in Australia right now, we will actually have to deal with this for another 6 years before we are up to the really high levels of international student enrollments that we had in 2019. That's difficult. That's a big problem really for Australia, because we rely so much on international student funding. The logic that we adhered to here over the last years was that international students subsidize local students. That allowed the government to actually take away funding, because there's so much international money coming in. The more government took away funding, the more unis open themselves up for international students. And by now, you're really vulnerable as an international, as a university, to the lack of international students, because this wasn't planned for at all. It really wasn't on anybody's radar that international enrollments could drop that fast. There were lots of scenarios being dealt with in terms of a potential trade war with China, but you could then take international students from other locations to kind of make up for this downfall, and it wasn't expected to be that bad. But now we're in this situation. What will universities do? Well, there's another way of looking at the future chart here. So this chart shows the population, babies on the left-hand side, 100-year-old folks on the right-hand side, shows the population in Australia. We do see the 2019 population, that we have really strong, correct figures for the Australian population in 2019. And we do have the original population forecasts for 2030. They were done in late 2018, so very recent from a demographics perspective. But we have to correct those population forecasts downward because of COVID. And we don't really exactly know how much it will be, but we kind of have to cut out, and this is the black line here, we have to cut out quite a bit of population. About 1 million people we'll need to cut out for the 2030 population compared to the projections. And we see that we will actually see fewer people in the age brackets 22 to 28. Half of university students fall into this age brackets. Half of all university students are 22 to 28 years old. So universities in Australia lose the population base that they're currently operating on. They are missing out on the lucrative international students. So what do universities do? What should universities do? I would be very, very surprised if universities aren't going to extremely double down on postgrad education. We live in a knowledge economy. Lifelong learning is such a big topic wherever you go. It makes sense that universities really dive into this field and ensure to offer really short executive education type programs where you only study for a couple of months and you get some sort of mini degree. We might even come up with new degree names to be achieved. So this is something that universities will go for, double down on postgrad education, local students mostly. That can kind of buffer the fall for a bit. But not all institutions will be able to live through this. Not all educational institutions will be able to live through 3-4 years with lower international enrollments. Who will survive? I would say even though the large universities have high number of international enrollments, they will survive. They're too big to fail. Small universities in the inner cities, they're small universities, small institutions, that have really high international enrollments. Those guys will go bust. Regional universities that only have a relatively small share of international students, they will need to tighten the belt, but they'll probably be okay too. But that means that the international student enrollment game, really this will impact the built urban environment in the inner cities of our largest cities in Australia. The institutions that will go bust quite often have really nice properties in the inner suburbs, smack bang in the city centre most likely. The big universities will pouch. They will really just grab those really nice pieces. So I would expect that once this whole thing is over, the corona thing, the big players are going to be bigger and we'll have fewer educational players in the field in Australia. And of course, this has big implications for purpose-built student accommodation. International students love living in purpose-built student towers because their parents like the comfort of being able to book accommodation, to book housing before their 18-year-old babies arrive in Australia. International student housing and residential colleges are the only housing options where you can book a room without being physically present. These buildings will suffer massively. I would not be surprised if some of them go bust. what do you do with those buildings? Well, there are plenty of ideas being thrown around. You could repurpose them either for, well, hotels don't really matter at the moment. You could target the local migrants, really, a Sydney-sider who's moving to Melbourne, a young professional might just want to live for 3-4 months in one of those international student accommodations. They're of course repurposed and remarketed as young urban professional kind of towers, but that allows them to settle into the city. That's an option. Another option would be to utilize them as social housing options, because the social housing sector is actually lacking one-bedroom apartments, believe it or not. So this would be an option to jump into this. There is much more, a bit more data than I showed here in this column, so please feel free to click through the links that are underneath the video just to see the column, and please feel free to subscribe to this channel if you thought this was in any way helpful.